Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. It's Monday morning, April the 29th. We're nearly into May, the pre-summer month of 2024, which means we're into the middle part of the year. I'm a big calendar guy, and I'm always thinking in terms of the calendar. And I'm looking ahead to the first day of May. And I'm looking ahead to this 12th year of the Francis pontificate that we're now in, 11 years complete. And I happened to, as I'm looking over the landscape, have found a great article. And it's a great article by a master wordsmith in the I think English Catholic world, Damian Thompson, who I've long admired his writing. He wrote on the 27th an article for Unheard called "The Scandals Haunting Pope Francis. Scheming Cardinals Are Sharpening Their Knives." It's one of those titles on unheard.com that you don't know what it means, but the Twitter entry for this article by Mr. Thompson, Damian Thompson, excellent writer, made it sound more like a great summary of Francis's pontificate. And Damian Thompson left very, very few stones unturned in his survey of the Francis 11 years. There are times, I'm just going to read it for you. And there are times when I'm like, he could have gone a little more into this. Usually he wound up going into a topic or an event of the Francis pontificate in more depth later if he didn't at first blush. But I would just submit to you by way of introduction that Francis is getting progressively sicker. He's approaching the end of his life, which means that we all are approaching the next conclave, and there are scheming cardinals, as always, in the Vatican. What does Damian Thompson mean they're sharpening their knives? He's made about 3/4 of the cardinals of voting age are all Francis-made cardinals at Francis consistories. So does he mean that these Francis-made cardinals are sharpening their knives? The few opponents of Francis are, I guess, conservatives by definition. Are they sharpening their knives? It's a complex answer. And you get it through Thompson's simplistic but very long memory hold run through the chronology of the Francis pontificate. And he does so in a qualitative way, not a quantitative way. So I'm going to read you this article with a little bit of commentary of my own. April 27th, 2024, Damian Thompson. The scandals haunting Pope Francis. Scheming cardinals are sharpening their knives. The cardinals are already meeting to discuss who should be the next pope. Some of the liberal ones who feel safe because they're in favor with the ailing Pope Francis can be seen comparing notes in a bar near the gates of the Vatican. I was trying to figure out which bar this was as I read. The conservative cardinals are more nervous. They gather at suppers in each other's apartments, or if they can trust the fawning waiters not to betray them in a favorite restaurant. Perhaps you can see the flash of a bishop's ring as he taps a piece of gossip into WhatsApp. The Holy See employs world-class economic spies, so everyone uses a private phone rather than a Vatican-issued one. Even the phone tappers are busy exchanging information because, like everybody in Rome, they suspect that the painfully fragile Francis, who is often too short of breath to read out his own sermons, hasn't got long to go. They're just guessing, of course. The Pope is secretive about his health, and 2 years ago he bounced back from a major surgery on his colon that was assumed to be advanced cancer. Even so, even with the bounce back, he's 87, the oldest pope for more than a century, and a conclave can't be too far off. So quick pause. That was They never admitted what the colon surgery was. They gave some paltry reason that it could not have been a diverticulitis or something. And everyone was like, no, you don't have part of your colon removed for diverticulitis. And everyone has silently whistled past the graveyard of the fact that Francis is the oldest pope. He's now older than Benedict was by the time he retired. Isn't that weird? Because every day, every night, every day, you heard about the advanced stage of JP2 late in his pontificate. And every day, every night, when there was pontifical media being exchanged with regard to B16, you heard about how old he was. Well, Francis is advanced beyond either JP2's age or B16's, and you don't hear that much about it. You hear how he's decrepit, how he's in a tough way with health, but you don't hear how old he is. Again, that's because, as Damian Thompson will point out in several occasions in this article, the world press is with him. The one world fake news press is a recognizer of Francis as one of their own. Ludwig Ring-Eiffel of the German news agency KNA, which I've reported from quite frequently throughout the years, said in January that seeing the Pope so short of breath at a press conference at which he was too ill to answer prepared questions was, quote, a difficult moment for me. And you can tell that this situation has also affected many colleagues emotionally, end quote. At the beginning of March, Andrew Napolitano, a retired Superior Court judge from New Jersey, was staying in the papal guest house behind St. Peter's. The Pope is in poor health, can barely speak or walk, and he radiates sadness, Napolitano reported. I don't think he'll be here much longer. Vatican nerves are always on edge in the final years of a pontificate. In the case of the conservative Benedict XVI, they were overshadowed by leaks, gleefully reported by a hostile media, revealing flamboyant corruption at the top of the Roman Curia, the government of the Holy See. Benedict was too frightened to act and resigned in despair. Note Thompson's unabashed, straightforward handling of Benedict's pusillanimity here. He was too frightened to really push back months. He had the 8 years in the pontificate. He knew he was being opposed rather violently from within the cardinalate. He knew of the Sankt Gallen cadre against him. Most of them were his countrymen in Germany and immediate Northern European neighbors. And he just, as someone who had prayed as he first came into the pontificate, please, everyone, pray for me that I will always have the courage to resist the wolves of Rome. He always was running from running. Bear that in mind when you read these brief references, fleeting references to Benedict. Now the Vatican is once again paralyzed by scandals. But this time around, correspondents working for secular and Catholic outlets are trying to protect Francis, who faces more serious questions about his personal conduct than any pope in living memory. And that's really what this article will do. Recount those serious questions about his personal conduct and about his doctrinal equipoise. And Thompson seems to remember better than a lot of folks out there. Every time I think he's forgotten something, he'll mention it, even if it's out of chronological sequence, the way he proceeds in the rest of the article. For years, allegations that would torpedo the career of any secular Western leader have been concealed or played down by a Praetorian guard of liberal journalists who back in 2013 staked their reputations on the great reformer. As a result, even devout Catholics don't know that the first Jesuit pope has tried to shield several repulsive sex abusers from justice for reasons never satisfactorily explained. Francis has been an utter, embarrassing shame. His record on sex abuse. He has been the worst, perhaps ever. And you don't hear that reported by his Praetorian Guard of protective secular left media who love him. When is the last time the secular media has loved a pope? They will not, and even and as Thompson points out, this is my main idea here. Even devout Catholics, I'm thinking of the younger group of Pope splainers who have entered the church, don't even know all the sex scandals that Francis has been at near the epicenter of. Reasons never satisfactorily explained. He's just always near these scandals. Only now is the truth coming out to the relief of Vatican staff who have to deal with a pope who bears little resemblance to the wisecracking, avuncular figure they see on television. They are, or were until recently, terrified of a boss whose autocratic rule is shaped more by his rages and simmering resentments than by any theological agenda. This is arguable. I think this is a close call. His pontificate is, in fact, characterized, especially the closer to Rome you are, by his rages and his simmering resentments. But they are political and personal resentments. And he does have a theological agenda, the agenda of the Sankt Gallen Mafia. He is not a theologian, but he does have a theological agenda, one that was handed on to him. So I disagree a little there. And he kind of contradicts himself on that. Like, he makes it pretty clear there's a theological agenda. Francis is just a complex dude. He goes on, and they can't conceal their satisfaction that one particularly gruesome scandal involved papal ally Father Marco Rupnik is stripping away the facade of the Squid Game pontificate, as it's nicknamed, after the South Korean Netflix series in which contestants have to win children's games to save themselves from execution. The Rupnik affair is the most sickening scandal I've encountered in more than 30 years of reporting on the Catholic Church. Rupnik, a supremely well-connected artist on whose tacky mosaics the church has spent hundreds of thousands of pounds, was expelled from the Jesuit order last year after he was credibly accused of raping religious sisters belonging to a community he founded in his native Slovenia. Women have come forward claiming that the community was a sex cult. They say he tried to force them to watch pornographic films, drink his essence out of a chalice, violently took the virginity of one sister in a car, and encouraged young women to engage in sexual threesomes that, according to Rupnik, would illustrate the workings of the Holy Trinity. Last year, facing an explosion of rage on Catholic social media, mainstream media were strangely silent. Pope Francis said he would act against his friend Rupnik. He hasn't done so, nor has he explained why, when Rupnik was facing excommunication for abusing the confessional to absolve one of his female sexual victims, he was invited to conduct a retreat at the Vatican, or why his subsequent excommunication was mysteriously lifted within weeks with the approval of the Pope. Remember all that? I didn't comment too much on Rupnik at the time because I'm like, this is obvious. And I also don't think it's a worse sexual scandal than the Theodore McCarrick scandal because Francis was more directly involved in the exoneration of McCarrick, arguably. And I just get sick of doing the sex scandal stuff. But that might just be a personal note. Maybe I should have covered Rupnik more, but it was like, this is sufficiently obvious. No one's defending Francis anymore. And yet I kind of awoke and found that people actually were. This month, Father Rupnik was listed in the 2024 Vatican Directory as a consultant on divine worship of all things. After all of those counts of the misuse of his office and what he did with a chalice, allegedly, divine worship consultant. Meanwhile, Bishop Daniele Libinori, the Jesuit who investigated the women's claims and found them credible, has been removed from his position as an auxiliary bishop in the Diocese of Rome. Now, this is the mark of Francis. He will remove the CDF who opposes the progressive theological agenda, Then our last CDF was the one that had condemned in the offing iteration of fiducia supplicans. He gets fired and he puts a guy in that will execute fiducia supplicans. And why did our previous CDF get fired? I'm just refreshing your recollection now. It's very typical of Francis to remove a good guy and put a bad guy into his position. And it's very clear that the good guy is being punished for being theologically sound.